Well, thank you so much for joining us tonight for our virtual natural history pub presentation, Homelands, Treaty, and Culture with Bobby Brunoe, General Manager of Natural Resources and Tribal Historic Preservation Officer for the Confederated Tribes of Warm Springs. My name is Christina Sid, and I'm the Director of Programs for the museum. I extend my gratitude to the Pacific Northwest Forest Service Association, also known as Old Smokies, for their support of Natural History Pub. The museum sits in and shares the stories of what was, is, and always will be the Indigenous Plateau. We're in the homeland of the Warm Springs, Wasco, and Paiute tribes, known today as the Confederated Tribes of Warm Springs. This land has long been a dynamic crossroads, a place where many Indigenous people traveled, gathered, and traded. We extend our respect and gratitude to the Confederated Tribes of Warm Springs and all of the Native communities who have lived here for thousands of generations and continue to thrive here today. We recognize the strength, resilience, and sovereignty of the Warm Springs, Wasco, and Paiute people, as well as Native people throughout the Indigenous Plateau who have long been and continue to be stewards of this land. We're honored to collaborate with the Confederated Tribes of Warm Springs and tribes throughout the plateau to share the stories and knowledge of the Indigenous Plateau. And I'm honored tonight to live out that work that we're doing here today with Robert Bobby Brunoe. As the General Manager of Natural Resources and Tribal Historic Preservation Officer, Bobby provides direction in carrying out the mission of the tribes for protection and enhancement of cultural and natural resources, and also the protection of on and off reservation treaty rights. Bobby's worked in the past for the tribes in various areas as the Range and Agriculture Department Manager, Hydropower Relicensing Coordinator, and Senior Natural Resources Policy Planner. Before coming to work for the tribes, Bobby has also worked for the Bureau of Indian Affairs Roads Department, the Family Business Cattle Operation, Construction Company, and Logging Company. Over the years, Bobby has served on numerous boards and been appointed by officials ranging from past Oregon governors to the U.S. Secretary of Interior to assorted advisory panels, including the Oregon Governor's East Side Forestry Advisory Panel, BLM John Day Snake River Regional Advisory Council, and with gratitude, the High Desert Museum. Bobby currently serves as the chairman of the Tribes Resource Managers Interdisciplinary Team, co-chairs the Deschutes Basin Water Collaborative, and chairman of the Deschutes River Conservancy. Current and past tribal councils have selected Bobby to represent the tribes on several negotiation teams over the years. As you can tell, Mr. Bobby has more than 30 years of experience in the field of natural and cultural resources and has worked with many experts over the years. And I am so pleased to introduce him tonight as he talks more about homelands, treaty, and culture. And I'll turn it over to you, Bobby.
Thank you, Christina. Itakti Wigwa, everyone. My Indian name is Shlautia, and what I just said in the Kitch language, which is the Wasco language, I'm Wasco tribal member, is means it doesn't translate real well, but it's a good evening or have a beautiful evening. So again, that's Itakti Wigwa. And this first slide I'm showing you here is the Mount Jefferson. This is a photo I took on from the top of Lion's Head looking west. The reservation boundary goes to the top of Mount Jefferson. As you can see, it's a beautiful mountain. Unfortunately, all the green you see right there in this photo right now is not like that anymore after last year's large fires, the Lion's Head fire. So it looks a little bit different now. I'm going to be talking tonight about the tribes, who we are, the three different tribes. I'm going to talk about the treaty. I'm going to talk about our constitution, how we're structured as a government, and kind of go through that, and some land status of our homelands, and also where we own lands across the Eastern Oregon and in Western Oregon, in the Willamette Valley in particular. So I will move on to the next slide. And in this slide here, This is one about who we are. And the Confederate Tribes of Warm Springs is made up of 3 tribes, the Warm Springs tribe, the Wasco tribe, and the Paiute tribe. The Wasco people, we come from the Columbia River, and the Warm Springs people come from the Columbia River. This photo here is a photo from the 50s of Celilo Falls. This is a main fishery area that our tribes fished at, and is now unfortunately gone. It was inundated on March 10th, 1957, when they closed the gates at the Dalles Dam, and just in a few hours, all of Celilo Falls was flooded and it disappeared under the waters. And that's about 13 miles up from Dalles Dam is where the location of Celilo Falls are. The Paiute people, they come from Southeast Oregon in the high plateaus. And so those are the 3 tribes in Warm Springs that make the Confederacy. The treaty, we have a treaty that we signed with the US government and negotiated. And the treaty was signed in 1855, and it was June 25th, 1855 is when we had the treaty signed. The treaty reserved the rights to fish, hunt, gather our cultural foods, and to pasture livestock on unclaimed lands in our ceded lands and usual and custom sites. Now, the important thing I want to point out here is the treaty reserved rights. And there's a key word there called reserved. Reserved is we reserve these rights. We never gave up any rights. And so we have these rights time immemorial. So that's a really important piece of the treaty, is that we reserve rights. We never gave them up. The US government has a trust responsibility to the tribes to protect and enhance those the resources, the fish, deer, our native foods, the roots and berries that we gather. So those are all very important to us. The photo right there is a photo of the treaty itself, and one page of it. The treaty, I don't know, maybe some of you were lucky to go to the museum in Warm Springs here a couple of years ago when they brought the treaty from Washington to the museum under heavy guard, and it was guarded the whole time it was in Warm Springs, but the original treaty, and folks were able to go and look at the treaty. So that was the first time the treaty had been to the reservation. So that was quite an event to have that happen. Now the treaty reserved rights and ceded lands. We have, if you go online to the tribe's website, it has the treaty there, and in the treaty it defines the ceded lands, and I'm going to go through this here. The ceded lands are 10 million acres in size, and the boundaries described in the treaty. And I don't know if folks can see my pointer, but just downstream from Cascade Locks, heading south on the crest of the Cascades. And as you get down the crest of the Cascade, you come to this straight line here on the south boundary. That's the 44th parallel. And for reference, just you can see bent just where my arrow is right here. It goes 44th parallel all the way out into the Blue Mountains, to the crest of the Blue Mountains. follows the crest of the Blue Mountains all the way to a creek called Willow Creek. Headwaters of Willow Creek, down Willow Creek, back to the Columbia River, mid-channel of the Columbia River, back to its original point. So as you can see, here's Arlington here on the eastern boundary of our ceded lands, and John Day right here. And this takes in 10 million acres. It takes in all of the John Day Basin. It takes in most of the Deschutes Basin. It takes in all of the Hood River Basin is our ceded lands. Now on this map, you'll see where there's green. All the green is national forest. The yellow is BLM lands. And this tan is the national grasslands. Now, why do I have this on this map in explaining that to you? These are lands that are unclaimed. Where you see the white, these are all private lands in white. The unclaimed lands are the lands where we're able to exercise our treaty rights to fish, hunt, and gather and pasture livestock. And if you go up here and see this pink, says Umatilla, this is the Umatilla Reservation, our relatives up here. And you can see Yakima up north, just to see a tip of them, their reservation. So this is our ceded lands. There are 7 national forests that we talk with on a regular basis. You have the Mount Hood National Forest, the Deschutes National Forest. You have the Willamette comes up in here. You have the Ochco National Forest. You have the Umatilla and the Malheur National Forest, and the BLM, and the Wallowa Whitman. So these are all folks that we interact with, looking out for our treaty rights that are, they have a trust responsibility to help manage and look after. We also, on this map, have, you'll see these kind of salmon colored lands here. This is the middle fork of the John Day. This is the main stem of the John Day in Prairie City. These are lands that the tribes own and have, and we manage them for conservation. This land here, Pine Creek Conservation Area, over by Fossil, a little town of Clarno. Here, we own lands down by Condon and some lands at the mouth of the John Day. We have lands from the reservation down Harpum Flat, where I know a lot of folks are familiar with that. The tribes own Harpum Flat down here, where most people put in for rafting. And then we also own Sandy Beach, where a lot of folks pull out for rafting, a little town of Maupin there. So these are lands that are owned by the tribes. You go to the mouth of the Deschutes, across the river on the west side from the state park, the tribes own lands there. Just on 15 Mile Creek, out of the Dalles, Mosier, lands that the tribes own there. Hood River, the tribes own land right at Hood River. And you can't see on this one very at all, but on Cascade Locks, the tribes own property there. And also you get west of the Cascades, and right over here is a place called Red Hills, some conservation lands the tribes own. You got a little town called Lafayette and Dundee in between. On the, I know there's probably a lot of folks in the audience that have driven down the highway heading towards Salem, and there's a little place called Little Sweden. The tribes own that on both sides of the highway. So if you're ever driving through, you see a sign that says Little Sweden, you'll know you're going through our property. And then on the Clackamas River, there's a place called Austin, and it's Austin Hot Springs. There's some hot springs right there that the tribes own. So we have conservation lands from the Willamette Valley, clear over on the east side into our ceded lands. So these are places where we exercise our rights. Another piece there on the treaty is usual and custom sites or usual and custom stations, as it says in the treaty. Those are not defined by a boundary where we exercise our rights. So example of exercising our rights of a usual and custom station would be over in Oregon City at Willamette Falls. We have a fishery there. Every year we go and gather lamprey, or we call them eels. They're not a true eel, but they're lamprey. We have a fishery that we set for regulations on, it's not on this map here, but as you go down river to the Cowlitz River over by Longview, Washington, we set a fishery for smelt down there. So we go down there to exercise our treaty rights. We also go up into the Gifford-Pinchot National Forest, up to Trout Lake to go gather huckleberries. So these are all places we go to exercise our treaty rights under the usual and custom stations areas. Again, those are not defined by boundaries. So these are up and down the Columbia River and in a couple of different states, Washington, Oregon, Idaho. So these are places that we go and exercise our rights. So we'll move on to the next slide. This is the reservation itself. It is 640,000 acres in size, or 1,000 square miles. And it is defined in the treaty also. And in the treaty, it has these boundaries and a little bit of story about this boundary right here. And there was a dispute for many years since actually the signing of the treaty. There was two surveyors that went out and surveyed the reservation. One surveyor's name was Campbell, and he was not known as a very good surveyor. And he surveyed the reservation kind of and jogged it through here and down this way, and really cut off a lot of the reservation. Another surveyor, McQuinn, surveyed it correctly, and this is the line we have today. It was not until 1972 that Congress recognized the error and was the tribes were able to get their lands back. And so we were able to get this, what they called McQuinn Strip, back in ownership to the tribes. So that just happened in 1972. So it was a long haul to finally get some lands back that the tribe should have had all along to begin with. The reservation itself, if you see this light green, in this light green is the forest. And our forest is 444,000 acres. The remainder in the tan is rangelands. So Warm Springs is right here. And so Warm Springs is right in the rangeland. A lot of folks probably remember Canita. So Canita is right out here. We have a little community called Simnasho. And there's a little grocery store there, Simnasho. We have a very unique forest. We have a very diverse forest, one of the most diverse forests in the Pacific Northwest. On the southern end of the reservation, Metolius River is right here. And so it's right on the boundary of the Metolius River and then Deschutes River on the east side here. But on our forest here, the most northern reach of sugar pine ends on our lands. And it actually, we have a butte. This is Whitewater Canyon. We have a butte here called Chittike. And so it ends right about in this area is we have sugar pine. On the northern end of the reservation, we have the most southern reach of Alaska yellow cedar ends on the reservation. So we have Alaska yellow cedar that comes in here. So we're kind of this crossroads of species and diversity of our forests. We have noble fir, we have hemlock, of course, Douglas fir, ponderosa pine, sugar pine, the Alaska yellow cedars, western larch. So we have a little bit of everything on the reservation for forest. White oak, we have a white oak forest over in the north end of the reservation. So we have a little bit of everything here. And then, of course, the boundary of the reservation, as I opened up, goes to the top of Mount Jefferson. So we have quite a range of rainfall, moisture from 110 to 20 inches all the way down to the rangelands, where it gets down to 10 to 12 inches down here. So it's quite a gradient, and which is part of the reason we also have quite a diverse forest. So that's a little bit about the reservation land base there. The reservation is 99% owned by the tribes. There are a few allotments on there with a few private ownerships, but 99% of it is owned by the Confederated Tribes of Warm Springs. Now I'll get into our Constitution. We have a Constitution that was passed February 14th, 1938. This government is established by this Constitution and bylaws, and it's a little history about my family. My great-grandfather his name was Jerry Brunoe, and he's one of the signators on the Constitution. And also that's where I get my Indian name, Shlautia, I'm named after my great-grandfather. And part of my obligation and being named after him is to learn as much as I can about him, and also tell others his story and who he was and what he did. So that's so I'm honored to have my great-grandfather's name. And this is our photo of some of our first tribal council leaders. Our tribal council is made up of 11 members. We have 3 chiefs, one from each of the tribes. We have the Wasco chief, Warm Springs chief, and the Paiute chief. Each of those chiefs, they are chosen by their tribe, not through our Constitution or through the government system. It's the traditional ways that they elect or choose their chiefs. So each tribe does it a little bit different. There are 8 elected members to tribal council, and every 3 years there's an election, and we get a new tribal council. Our next election will be next April for a new tribal council for those 8 members. So there's representatives for each of the tribes. There's 3 for the Warm Springs, 3 for the Wasco, and 2 for the Paiute people. They meet 3 days a week or more. Here lately, they've been meeting more, so they've actually been meeting 5 days a week here lately. And I was just meeting with them this morning, so I had a meeting with tribal council. And this is actually, I'm coming up to my last slide. The reason we take care of this treaty, and the reason I do the work that I do, is one, looking out for the treaty and protecting it. And in protecting the treaty means taking care of our resources, taking care of the water, taking care of the fish, taking care of the roots and berries, and taking care of the wildlife. And so those are things that help protect our treaty. And for future generations, you always hear 7 generations out. There's a, we think about that all the time. I'm reminded by our elders and by our tribal council about that all the time. And so it's very important to us. And I picked this photo here. This is a photo of Jordan Holiday. He's 5 years old. This is spring Chinook fishing, and this is his very first salmon he ever caught at Shears Falls on the Deschutes River. And the background that I have tonight behind me is a photo I took of Shears Falls, and that's a place where we do our traditional fishing. It's where I learned to fish on scaffolds with hoop net and dipping as a kid. I grew up down there. It's one of my favorite places to go. And in fact, some of the fish are in right now, some of the salmon. So I might be going down there here pretty soon to go see if I can get some salmon. So this is a really important place to us and our tribal members. The tribes own the land there at Shears Falls. And so it's a special place for tribal members. It's a special place for me. It's a special place for young people like this, like Jordan. Jordan is not that young anymore. He now works in our fire management area. So working and fighting fires is what he does, working in natural resources. So that's my my presentation for the night. And it feels a little awkward for me because I'm used to seeing an audience and getting some interactions. So I'm really interested in questions now. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Bobby. I really appreciate you sharing with us. I always learn something new from you. So thank you so much. And as folks know, we'll be, please feel free to put your questions in the chat or on the Q&A part of Zoom, which if you just look at the bottom of your screen and kind of hover over the chat or the Q&A, you are welcome to type in any questions that you have there. And I may, as folks are starting to put in their questions, I'd love to hear kind of as from the natural resource perspective, what are some of the priorities? I know you just mentioned water certainly being a priority and thinking about salmon and fishing. What are other projects that you might be working on now or kind of key priorities for you and the tribes?
Yeah, there's a slide I usually use, and I didn't, I should have put it in tonight, but there's one about gifts from the Creator. And the Creator gave us gifts, and the gifts come in order. And so the first gift the Creator gave us was water. Take care of the water, protect the water, be respectful of the water. Second gift from the Creator is the fish, making sure we're not taking more than we need and watching out for those fish. Next is the deer, the elk, the wildlife, and taking care of them. And then the fourth gift is our roots and berries and the plants, and they're also taking care of those, but always making sure we're doing this in balance, that we're not taking more than we need of those resources, then they can sustain us. You had asked what things are we working on? We are working on a lot of fish habitat work in the John Day Basin, the Deschutes Basin, the Hood River Basin, and also in the Willamette Valley. In that basin, we're doing some work on some of those conservation lands. So fisheries is very important to us. So that's a lot of my work ends up being in fisheries. Also, the water, what's going on with water. We follow what's happening with water here in the Deschutes Basin. We follow water that's going on in John Day and also in Hood River. So we're interacting with these different basins, and again, also in the Willamette Valley, we follow what's going on there. So those are some of the big things we work on, again, with wildlife, making sure we're working with our co-managers at ODF&W, and make sure we're taking care of those animals and that they're sustainable for our hunters and also for others that are non-tribal.
Great, thank you. I hear a lot of collaboration, a lot of work going on there in collaboration and working with others. We have several questions, and one of the ones I know when you were talking about the tribal council and number of members on that, one person's wondering why the Paiute tribe has only 2 members on tribal council where others get 3.
The reason is because they were not originally treaty signers. The treaty signers were the Wasco tribes and the Warm Springs tribes. The Paiute people came in later on in the late 1860s, 1870s to the reservation, and some of them got stuck on our reservation. And over time, the tribes adopted the Paiute tribe that was there. And through our Constitution that I talked about from 1938, that is where the tribes adopted and incorporated the Paiute people onto our reservation. So that's a little bit of the story about how the Paiutes got there to Warm Springs.
Thank you. And there's, if you're looking for a question, there's no particular order that I'm going in and picking them. One person would like to know the energy sources that the tribes use for electricity. So where's energy coming from?
Energy comes from Pacific Power and from Wasco Electric. Those are the 2 that bring power to the reservation there.
Thank you. And a question is, how many people live in on the reservation specifically?
There's about 5,500 tribal members, and there's probably about 500 that live off reservation, but the majority of folks live on reservation, the tribal members.
Thank you. There's a question wondering, what are some of the issues that the tribal council takes up? So what are some of the things that are discussed there? And also, is the tribal council the only governmental or political body?
The tribal council is the only political body on the reservation. There's different committees that report to them that are their eyes and ears: Fish and Wildlife Committee, Timber Committee, Culture and Heritage Committee. So we have different committees that report to them. The some of the issues they take up. You probably have heard in the news about our water infrastructure in Warm Springs. That's definitely something they talk about in council and how to alleviate that. So those are some of the issues. They talk about issues that are going to affect the tribes and their treaty rights. Example would be the Columbia River Treaty. And for folks that aren't familiar with that, that is the negotiations between the United States and Canada on the Columbia River and the water coming from Canada into the United States. And what does that mean for the tribes? You know, we're looking at it for our fisheries concerns. So they're watching things like that and having discussions about it. Discussions at levels, international levels, also with Canadians on fisheries out in the ocean. So there's some international discussions that happen there. So our council's involved in that and follow those. They're constantly following what's happening on the national level in Washington, and also what's happening in the state of Oregon. So they have lobbyists in Washington and a lobbyist for the state of Oregon that report to them on a regular basis on different bills that are coming through, and keeping a pulse on what's happening, you know, statewide and nationally. So those are a few things. Yeah. Definitely a large part of my job being natural resources is I'm in there quite a bit with them, and so talking about all the natural resources issues you can think of, from timber to climate change, is definitely on their minds. Another big one they talk about: projects like we have for carbon sequestration in our forest, the fisheries and water and wildlife. issues also. So quite a few. They have
Yeah.
Health and Human Services, public safety. It runs the gamut.
Yeah, it sounds very busy. I can see why they're meeting 5 days a week right now, as you're
Mhm.
saying. One question too was when you just mentioned forests and kind of do the tribes still log? Is there still the logging industry there?
Yes, the tribes do log. We log a sustainable cut for the tribes is 25 million board feet. So that's what we cut each year. Unfortunately, with the Lion's Head fire and then also the fire we had earlier this summer, we are cutting more than that, not because we want to, but we trying to get the value we can out of those that timber before it starts going bad with bugs and rotting and blue stains. So, but generally it's a 25 million board foot a year is our sustainable cut.
Thank you. And a couple folks are thinking about, as you've talked about, the importance of water, and I know that I think our community understands the challenges of water, the water crisis that the Confederated Tribes of Warm Springs are facing, and so some of the folks are wondering about kind of where your water is coming from, but what is the status of the current infrastructure, and what are some of the challenges coming from around water?
Okay. Well, the tribes for the community Warm Springs and for the Canida area, there's also some rural homes as you're going out to Canida. That water system is aged, and the water that we get comes from the Deschutes River. So there's a water treatment plant right along the Deschutes River down by what we call Dry Creek. There's a little creek that dumps in. There's a Dry Creek campground there. That's the water treatment plant for the water in Warm Springs. And so that's the system that really needs help, and they're doing a lot of work on it right now. So that's been challenging for folks.
Yeah, right. Thank you for sharing. Going back, yeah, lots of great questions. Thank you for taking all the time to answer these. A question is, are the off-reservation lands in trust with the federal government also?
Yes and no. There are lands that are in trust. So example is Sandy Beach in Shears Falls. Those lands are in trust. And Harpin Flat is in fee status. So what does that mean? So fee lands are lands that we pay property taxes on. It's just lands that everyone's familiar with. If you own property, you pay property taxes. Trust lands are not. So those lands also being trust lands means they're under the jurisdiction of the Confederate Tribes Warm Springs. So all our laws apply to those lands that are in trust. So the reservation is in trust, which also means that the state of Oregon laws do not apply on those trust lands. There's back in the 50s, there's an act, is Public Law 280, which exempt the Confederate Tribes of Warm Springs and 2 other tribes from jurisdiction for states to have jurisdiction on their lands. And so that's one of the reasons we have that. It's most reservations you go to don't have that type of status. I think there's a couple of reservations that have been working on getting that and may have it now. That so a little more backstory there.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think I often hear questions around what does that trust status kind of mean? And so I think getting more of that information, I think is really helpful. Thank you. One person would like to know kind of if the United States Congress is going to pass an infrastructure bill. Do you know if there's money potential money in there for Warm Springs, or if you know anything more about the conversations there?
There's, I know our tribal council's been working with congressional representatives, the 2 senators, and And so they've had a lot of discussions about funding and type of funding that Warm Springs may need here. And so I believe they are working on doing something like that. So hopefully that comes through, and there's some money that comes Warm Springs way to help with the infrastructure.
Great. And you mentioned talking about PGE, and there's some questions here about if the fish hatchery is still active. And also, do the tribes have an input on the amount of water kind of kept behind Pelton Dam, or what is that relationship, I think, with the dams and water, and thinking about PGE relationships as well?
Yeah, good question. Yeah, the Warm Springs, the tribes are partners with Portland General Electric. So that means that they work very closely together. It's on our enterprise side, Warm Springs Power and Water is the side that works with the PGE on. And the tribes are a third owner of the projects. So, and actually a third of the project is on tribal land. So they work very closely. We work very closely, our staff, with PGE on fisheries and fish passage and establishing runs above the dam. The water it's a run-of-river project. So whatever water's coming down into the system is what they let out at the bottom of the project area. So there's, yeah, tribes work very closely with their partner, PGE.
Great, thank you. Just a couple more questions if you're up for it. I think I appreciate they're coming in. People are asking, yeah, thoughtful questions. One of the ones is, what are some of the biggest opportunities for partnerships with the local organizations and other governments for conservation on Warm Springs ceded land? So, again, it's biggest opportunities for partnerships, or conversely, the other question is kind of what are some of the challenges? But however you'd like to answer that.
We have a lot of partners we work with. We work with a lot of non-governmental organizations, the local Deschutes Basin Land Trust as an example, the Nature Conservancy, of course, the Deschutes River Conservancy, the different watershed councils in each of these basins. So we're interacting with also the soil and water conservation districts on different projects for water and fisheries habitat. We operate a hatchery on the Hood River. So there's a hatchery on the Hood River for spring Chinook salmon, and that's operated by Warm Springs. So we have a lot of partnerships over in the Hood River. And so we're working with, of course, our federal partners, the Forest Service and the BLM, and also the state of Oregon, ODF&W, Water Resources Department, Department of Ag, Natural Resource Conservation Service on the federal agency side, Farm Service Administration. The list goes on and on. There's a lot of folks we interact with and try to stretch what few dollars we get to do good projects out on the ground. So we're always open to new neighbors and new partners.
Yeah, and I can imagine it's one of the questions saying, what are some of the challenges, like with partners are great opportunities, but also there's a lot to manage there. I think two more questions that we'll do that I see here. One of them asks about, do you manage for northern spotted owls?
Yes, we do. We know every owl on the reservation. We do surveys every year. We manage with core areas, 70-acre core areas around nesting sites and their habitat. So yeah, we, in fact, the biologist that we contract to look at him every year. He's been doing it for quite a few years now. I wouldn't be surprised he has them all named.
Yeah, great, thank you. And I'll end on maybe not an easy one, but an important one. Okay. One of the questions says, land acknowledgement statements have become more common these days. Is acknowledgement of former occupancy enough, or might the statements be strengthened in some way?
I think a general land acknowledgement is good, recognizing that Native people, Indigenous people have been here. When you start trying to name specific tribes, then it kind of sometimes gets a little challenging. And so to not offend tribes, it's best to keep it general and acknowledge that we've all been here and have been here for a long time. Our elders always tell us time immemorial, tens of thousands of years. I'm the Tribal Historic Preservation Officer, so I work with archaeologists and reading articles and that all the time. And it always just amazed me, some of the things that they find that are a lot older than they ever thought. So it's I think being respectful of tribes and giving that acknowledgement, I think it means a lot to folks.
Thank you. And I'm just, for folks, putting a link to the museum's land acknowledgement if people also want to read that. I know I said it at the beginning of the program, but I also appreciate, Bobby, that you gave us some feedback and working with us on our land acknowledgement. And I also want to tell you that comments that are coming in showing a lot of gratitude for you, saying Bobby rocks, and a lot of gratitude, and also from a colleague of mine who was also wondering if you would do this program in person, and I can certainly connect you with that. So I have a lot of gratitude for you sharing your evening with us, helping folks to understand and learn more about the Confederated Tribes of Warm Springs. I have a lot of gratitude. And for folks, I do want to just reiterate that I put it in the chat, but this is being recorded and will be shared through the High Desert Museum's YouTube channel as well. And so this will be, you can watch it again, as I'm sure I will. I also want folks to know, so thank you, Bobby. I also want to invite folks to know about our next Natural History Pub program, which is on November 1st at 7 p.m. And it is a Land of Fire and Ice Forest Resilience in Central Oregon. And through there, we'll join Ariel Cowan, Regional Fire Specialist, and Thomas Stokely, a Forest and Natural Resource Extension Agent from OSU Extension, for the story of how fire has shaped the lives of various organisms throughout Central Oregon. And you can register for that on our website, the museum's website, the same way you did for this, but just go into the November 1st program. And I hope to see you there. And again, folks, thank you for joining us. And Bobby, thanks for being here. We really appreciate it.
Yes, thank you. And thank you, everyone, for listening to me tonight. And I do prefer doing it in person. But thank you.
Yeah, we will get there again soon. So thanks, folks. Have a great evening. Enjoy your night and be well. Bye-bye.